She always said she was proud of her daughter. "My little girl is the light of my eyes," she would repeat with that sweet smile only a mother can have. Her name was Margaret, but the neighbors called her Miss Maggie, a white-haired woman with a hopeful look. She raised her daughter alone, with great sacrifice, after her husband died in a construction accident in Detroit. She was the kind of woman who knew how to turn a little into a lot, and she did so every day. Her daughter's name was Claire. Beautiful, articulate, and intelligent. From a young age, she impressed everyone with her charisma and ability to get what she wanted. Maggie worked extra hard to provide everything for her daughter: good schools, clean clothes, hot food on the table. She always said Claire would have a better life than her, a life without deprivation. What Maggie didn't know was that this same dedication would eventually backfire. Before I continue, I want to say that I ask God to bless you with all His infinite love, giving you much health, peace, joy, and faith, for we can never lose faith in God, for He will never abandon us, for His love is eternal and infinite. I also take this opportunity to ask that you like the video and subscribe to the channel. It helps me a lot, thank you. Now, hold on tight, because what comes next will leave you speechless. As the years passed, Claire grew up, graduated with a business degree, and soon landed a good job in Chicago. She spent holidays with her mother, brought her flowers, smiled in photos, and said everything she did was for her. Maggie believed her, of course. After all, she was her daughter, her only treasure. But, somewhere between youth and ambition, Claire changed. And no one noticed the transformation until it was too late. It all started subtly. First, criticism disguised as concern. Small corrections about how Maggie organized the house. Then came the questions about bills, debts, savings. "Mom, don't you think you're too old to live alone? What if you fall? What if you forget to turn on the stove?" It seemed like affection, but it hid something darker. An interest that Maggie, in her innocence, couldn't see. Claire began showing up more frequently, always with a practiced smile and a ready excuse. She brought expensive gifts, talked about investments, and said she wanted to help her mother have a more peaceful life. One rainy afternoon, he showed up with a lawyer. He said it was just a piece of paper to make things easier in case something happened. Maggie hesitated, but signed. She trusted her daughter completely. In the following days, Claire's presence intensified. She began rearranging furniture, changing account passwords, and selling her mother's old car. She claimed it was all for her own good. Maggie, though uncomfortable, was still smiling. She thought she might be being too stubborn. After all, her daughter only wanted the best, didn't she? That's what she thought, until she found a hidden box in the laundry room closet. Inside the box were old letters, notes from her deceased husband, and, most curiously, household documents that Claire had said were lost. Maggie was intrigued. Why would Claire lie about this? She decided to keep the discovery to herself, waiting for the right moment to ask. What she didn't realize was that Claire was already 2 steps ahead. One Saturday afternoon, Claire arrived with a man in a tie and said, "Mom, this is the person who's going to handle your move." Maggie froze. "Moving? But I didn't even pack anything." Claire then smiled awkwardly and said, "No need, Mom. You just need to leave. Now." The ground seemed to drop away from beneath Maggie's feet. It was the beginning of the nightmare. What no one knew was that Claire had transferred all of her mother's assets into her own name. The house, the bank account, even her personal belongings. Everything was now legally hers. Maggie, unknowingly, had signed a document giving her daughter full power. And now, she was being kicked out of her own home by the woman she had raised with so much love. The neighbor, Donna Helen, saw everything from her window. She called the local pastor in despair. "They're throwing Maggie out. In the rain, with only one suitcase." The pastor rushed over, but it was too late. Claire had already locked the door. And Maggie was sitting on the sidewalk, in the light drizzle, her eyes lost in space. It seemed as if the world had silently collapsed. But God doesn't sleep. And what Claire forgot was one small detail: an old document, kept by Maggie at the bottom of the laundry box, that could nullify the entire action. A property deed, with special clauses, written by her late husband. But that was still a secret. and Maggie needed help understanding what she had in her hands. She spent the night in a local church pew, covered with a donated blanket. The women in the congregation brought soup, coffee, and words of comfort. "Trust me, sister. God is watching." And he was. Because the next day, something unexpected happened. A stranger approached, claiming to know Maggie's husband from the past, and with him, a key. A key that would open doors Claire never imagined still existed. This man, a war veteran named Henry, said he owed the deceased a favor, and that he had proof of a promise made between them, notarized. Maggie could hardly believe it. There was still a chance. A fire lit in her eyes. But Claire wasn't about to lose so easily. And the game was just beginning. The following Sunday, Claire appeared at church, looking angelic, saying she wanted to reconcile with her mother. But Maggie now saw what had previously been invisible: the ambition in her daughter's eyes, the false sweetness in her tone, the practiced handshake. She said nothing. She just smiled, keeping her silence as if concealing a powerful weapon. Because she knew God's justice would come in its own time. And it did. But not in the way you'd imagine. Just when Claire thought she was in complete control, a letter arrived in the mail. And the contents of that letter were the first crack in the castle of lies she'd built. Maggie had never been up to that attic since her husband left. It was as if that space held the echo of memories she wasn't yet ready to revisit. But that morning, something pushed her upward. Maybe it was intuition, maybe it was God. Her feet climbed the creaking stairs as if they knew what they were looking for. And what she found would change everything. Covered with old cloths and stacked cardboard boxes, the attic smelled of dust and longing. Maggie ran her hand over an old wooden box, locked with a rusty padlock. She recognized it immediately. It was her late husband Joseph's box. No one knew of its existence, not even Claire. Heart-pounding, Maggie went downstairs, found a key hidden in the kitchen cabinet, and opened it. Inside the box were handwritten letters, a small silver crucifix, and a thick envelope marked "Only if everything goes wrong." Maggie felt a shiver run down her spine. She opened the envelope with trembling hands. Inside were copies of old records, a deed with specific clauses, and a name she hadn't seen in decades: Henry Callahan. The same man who'd appeared at the church. She didn't know what to think. It was too much information all at once. But one letter in particular caught her attention. Handwritten by Joseph, it read, "Maggie, if Claire ever loses her pride, remember who you are. This document guarantees that, even though everything is in her name, the house can only be transferred with her personal, written, notarized consent." Maggie fell to her knees. It was like hearing her husband's voice again. Tears flowed without asking permission. 4 years, she had kept this pain silent, and now God showed her that he had never left her alone. She remembered the psalm she always recited on difficult nights: "Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me." And now, Maggie felt she was about to emerge from the valley, but not without weathering the storm. Determined, she decided to meet with Henry again. She took the documents and the letter and asked him to help her understand everything. Henry, upon seeing the contents, widened his eyes. "Maggie, this changes everything. This document is legally binding. She may have forged signatures or manipulated you, but this is a legal bombshell." It was the beginning of a turning point. But Maggie still hesitated. She was his daughter, after all. During the night, alone in the small room of the church where she was staying, Maggie prayed as she hadn't prayed in a long time. She asked for wisdom. She asked for peace. She asked God to show her the way without hardening her heart. The sky was dark, but a gentle breeze blew through the window and brought a kind of comfort only those with faith know. And with that, she decided, she would face Claire. But she would do it the right way. She returned to her old house the next day. She knocked firmly on the door. Claire appeared, surprised but still sweet. "Mom, you're back. I was worried." Maggie, with a firm look in her eyes, replied, "We need to talk." Claire let her in, but she didn't imagine that visit would be the beginning of her own breakdown. Maggie knew everything now, and Claire still had no idea. In her husband's old office, Maggie showed him the envelope. Claire turned pale. She tried to laugh, change the subject, downplay it. "Oh, Mom, that's old, it's worthless." But Henry appeared shortly after, with a community attorney. "You'll have to prove that in court, Claire." The mood changed. That office became a silent battlefield. And the worst was yet to come. In the days that followed, Claire tried to turn things around. She called every day, crying, saying she was sorry. But Maggie was paying attention now. She no longer let herself be swayed by rehearsed tears. She knew the difference between regret and despair. And Claire was desperate, not out of love, but out of fear of losing everything she had stolen. Meanwhile, Henry's lawyer analyzed every document, every clause, every detail. "Maggie, this house is still rightfully yours. And what's more, this forgery could lead to Claire facing criminal charges." Maggie felt a pang in her heart. She didn't want to see her daughter arrested. But she also couldn't allow such injustice. It was time to trust in divine justice, and in the justice of men. One night, sitting in the church pew, Maggie was surprised by a woman who approached slowly. "You don't know me, but I babysat Claire when she was little. I saw her start to change. She always felt the world owed her everything." Maggie listened in silence, her heart aching. Where had she gone wrong in her upbringing? It was a question that echoed every night. But sometimes, it's not a matter of guilt, but of choices. Claire chose the path of greed. And Maggie, now, chose the path of truth. And when the truth begins to emerge, no amount of darkness can hide it for long. What Claire didn't know was that other documents, kept by Joseph at the bank, were about to emerge. Maggie decided to visit the old bank branch where her husband kept a joint account. There, she discovered a safe deposit box in her name. The manager, a friendly man named Andrew, recognized her surname. "Your husband was a man of integrity, ma'am. He always said he was protecting something important for the future." Upon opening the safe, Maggie was floored. Inside were more letters, photographs, and a will written in Joseph's own hand, notarized, declaring that the house would remain Maggie's until the last day of her life, non-transferable without explicit judicial consent. It was the final blow, and Claire had no idea it existed. Fate was unfolding, justly. Over the next few days, Maggie gathered everything: the letters, the will, the documents. She took them to her lawyer and asked that everything be done calmly, without rushing. "I don't want revenge. I just want my peace back." And the lawyer replied with a smile, "Then you'll have exactly that." But there was still something missing, one final link, which was closer than she imagined. This link would appear in an old yellowed photograph that Maggie found at the bottom of the box. It was Claire, still a child, sitting on her father's lap, with a pure, genuine smile. Maggie cried. She missed the daughter she once had. And she understood that, even after everything, there was still love in her heart. But love doesn't nullify justice. And justice was about to happen. The smell of fresh coffee filled the kitchen as Maggie prepared toast as she did every day. It was a sunny, seemingly ordinary morning. Claire arrived earlier than usual, with flowers in her hands and a smile on her face. "Mom, I just came to spoil you today," she said, giving her mother a kiss on the cheek. Maggie smiled, but inside, something wasn't right. Claire poured the coffee and pulled up a chair, as if she wanted to talk about something important. "Mom, you know I love you, right? I only want the best for you." Her voice was soft, but Maggie sensed a faint rehearsal, like someone repeating a memorized line. The conversation then began to veer, to bills, to assets, to security. Maggie listened in silence. "I just want to help you organize things," Claire said, spreading a piece of paper across the table. "It's a simple power of attorney document, to make decisions easier if something happens." Maggie looked at the paper, confused. "You trust me, don't you, Mom?" Claire asked, looking into her mother's eyes with an almost angelic expression. But Maggie hesitated. It was at that moment that the first crack appeared. Something in Maggie's heart told her not to sign. But Claire began to insist. "Look, Mom, the world has changed. You can't be left alone with so many responsibilities. I just want to ease your burden." And there, pen in hand, Maggie felt a lump in her throat. But she signed. From that moment on, everything began to subtly change. First came the credit cards. Then came access to the bank. Claire claimed she was organizing everything to save better. In less than a week, Maggie no longer had control over her own accounts. But Claire was so sweet, so convincing, and Maggie wanted to believe her. The gifts became more expensive, the visits more frequent, and the decisions increasingly unilateral. Claire began making improvements to the house without consulting her mother. "Trust me, Mom. This will increase the value of the property." Maggie tried to intervene, but was always silenced with hugs and kind words. But inside her, a restlessness began to grow that was difficult to ignore. One afternoon, Maggie saw a moving truck unloading new furniture. "What's going on?" she asked. Claire replied with a smile, "Just updating it a bit, Mom. This house needs a new lease on life." The old bookcase Joseph had built with his own hands was discarded, and no one asked Maggie's opinion. But the hardest blow would come from a simple detail. A manila envelope sat on the living room table. Maggie opened it out of curiosity and nearly fell over. It was a confirmation of transfer of ownership. The house, previously in her name, was now listed as Claire's. Her heart raced. Her vision blurred. She remembered the paperwork she'd signed days earlier. Filled with a mixture of shock and denial, Maggie confronted her daughter. "Claire, what is this?" The response was as cold as ever. "It's what's best for you, Mom. Everything is in my name now. You can relax and enjoy life." Maggie felt the ground drop away. The daughter she'd raised with so much love now spoke like a stranger. In the following days, Maggie tried to regain some control. But everything was out of reach. Passwords were changed. Accounts blocked. Visits were restricted. Claire began acting like she owned everything, including her mother's life. And worst of all, she began giving orders around the house, as if Maggie were just a guest. The pain was silent but profound. Routine became suffocating. Claire took over every room, rummaging through drawers, throwing away souvenirs. "These old things are useless," she said, as she discarded photo albums and old letters. Maggie began to feel like a shadow in her own house, a living ghost. And breakfast no longer tasted like home. That's when Maggie had a dream about Joseph. He appeared standing in the attic doorway, pointing upward with his finger. He woke in a cold sweat. He remembered the old box and the envelope it held. He felt it was a sign. And he decided to act, silently. While Claire left for work, Maggie went up to the attic and began rummaging through everything. "What you found there, we've seen before: documents, wills, photos, evidence." But there was something else that morning, a new, almost forgotten feeling. Strength. Maggie felt alive again. She knew she wasn't defeated yet, and that the real scam was just beginning to be unmasked. But Claire had no idea what was coming. Claire, meanwhile, began making bigger plans. Talking to real estate agents, renovation quotes, potential buyers. Yes, she intended to sell the house. The house where she was born. Where she lived with her father. Where she learned to walk. None of it seemed to have any value now. Money had taken over. And Maggie could barely sleep at night. Henry, upon learning what was happening, arranged a meeting with Maggie. They told him there was a new lawyer in the community, willing to help her free of charge. He was young but experienced. His name was Lucas, and as he read the documents, he said, "Ms. Maggie, this is more than a mistake. It's a crime. But we'll find a way." Maggie wept. With the support of Lucas, Henry, and the congregation, Maggie began gathering evidence. Recorded phone calls, text messages, statements from neighbors. Every detail became a piece of the puzzle. And while Claire smiled at dinners with friends, talking about the changes at home, little did she know the net was closing in around her. Maggie, on the other hand, remained silent. She continued her routine, feigning ignorance. But her gaze now held firmness, faith, and a silent conviction of someone who knows God is in control. She still didn't know how it would all end, but she knew justice was beginning to unfold. And the coup that began at breakfast would soon exact its price. It was a warm Thursday afternoon when Claire appeared with a bouquet of white lilies and a disconcertingly wide smile. "Today is a special day, Mom," she said, placing Maggie's favorite flower on the table. The gesture seemed sweet, but Claire's eyes were in a hurry. She wanted something, and Maggie could feel it in the air. The scent of the flowers barely masked the scent of manipulation. Claire brought 2 coffees, placed a folder on the table, and sat down next to her mother. "I've thought of everything. You don't need to worry about anything else. Just sign here, and everything will be taken care of." Her tone was too calm. Maggie looked at the document, full of legalese, difficult words, and small print. Her heart sank, but she tried to hide it. "It's just a confirmation of what we've already decided," Claire said, holding her mother's hand. "To avoid future bureaucracy. You'll stay here, you'll have everything you need. I'll just take care of the complicated part." Maggie hesitated. But then Claire looked her in the eye and said, "Trust me." And that was when the thread of trust gave way. Maggie signed. The pen glided slowly over the paper, as if each letter were an invisible knife. At the end of the signature, Claire took a deep breath, relieved, as if she had just secured victory. Maggie didn't know it yet, but that piece of paper represented the legal end of her rights to the house, the bills, the assets. Claire now had complete power, and she couldn't wait to begin her new phase. The next day, Maggie noticed the first changes. Her bank card no longer worked. The account number had been changed. "It must be a system error," Claire said, blaming the bank. But the error repeated itself at the grocery store, the pharmacy, even the doctor's office. Reality began to weigh down Maggie like a wet blanket. Desperate, she called the bank manager. He confirmed all access had been transferred to Claire. "But she's your daughter, isn't she? I assume everything's fine," he said, his tone almost conspiratorial. Maggie hung up without responding. She knew she'd made a mistake. And now, she didn't know how to undo it. The signature. There was no going back. The following days were dark. Claire hired a cleaning crew, rearranged the furniture, and changed the locks. She said she was modernizing the place. But each change was a loss for Maggie. A curtain ripped down, a picture frame replaced, a Bible gone. It was as if her history were being erased, detail by detail. The worst came one silent night, when Maggie came downstairs and found her suitcase packed near the door. "What's this?" she asked. Claire replied without blinking, "You're going away for a while, Mom. I've already arranged everything. Somewhere quiet, with caretakers. You need some rest." Maggie froze. Her own daughter was sending her away. Crying, she tried to argue. "This house is mine, Claire. Your father built it." But Claire was adamant. "It was, Mom. It's in my name now. Legally. You signed it yourself." Maggie fell onto the couch, stunned. The world spun slowly, as if fate's trickery were unfolding in slow motion. She couldn't breathe properly. Amidst the chaos, Maggie remembered the box in the attic. She remembered the will. The document that might still have value. It was her only hope. With the help of Henry and the young lawyer Lucas, she decided to gather evidence. But in the meantime, Claire wasted no time. She began the process of selling the house, with advertisements, real estate agent visits, even photos on social media. Maggie watched it all as if watching her own life being auctioned off in a public square. And no one seemed to notice. No neighbors spoke out. Everyone thought it was a family decision. But behind the scenes, Maggie fought an internal battle to keep herself from being consumed by hatred. She knew that to win, she needed to keep her heart clean. And her faith firm. During a visit to the bank with Lucas, they discovered a second document filed by Joseph, stating that any transaction involving the house would require 2 joint signatures. It was the loophole they needed. But there was a problem. This document wasn't digital. It was physically filed, in a disused branch. The deadline was tight. Claire already had a signed purchase proposal. Time was against Maggie. But Lucas didn't give up. He took the car and drove to the neighboring town to try to retrieve the original document. Meanwhile, Maggie feigned normalcy. She made tea, smiled, chatted about the weather, all to avoid arousing suspicion. But Claire sensed something was wrong. "You're so calm, Mom. What are you hiding?" Maggie simply replied, "When we have God, we have peace." Claire laughed mockingly. Then ask him to help you when you're in the nursing home. Because that's where you're going. The cruelty in her daughter's words was like a knife piercing her chest. But Maggie didn't react. That night, Maggie prayed a long prayer, like she hadn't done in a long time. Lord, I made a mistake. I signed without understanding. I trusted the wrong person. But I still believe in your justice. Show me the way. And that's when the phone rang. It was Lucas. I found it. It's here. The original document, signed, notarized. This changes everything, Miss Maggie. The woman's heart raced. It was as if a light had penetrated the dense darkness where she lived. But she knew there was still a long way to go before she could recover what she'd lost. And she would need courage. Claire, on the other hand, began preparing for the final move. She had already sorted her mother's furniture, labeled boxes with worthless things, and made a reservation at a nursing home. The biggest shock came when Maggie discovered that Claire planned to use the proceeds from the sale to open a coffee shop in Seattle. A new beginning, she proclaimed on social media, posing for photos with a storefront. Her daughter's ego had completely overshadowed her respect and gratitude. But Maggie was no longer going to stand idly by. Lucas filed an injunction, blocking the sale of the property. Claire was notified and, for the first time, panicked. "You can't do this," she screamed. But Maggie calmly replied, "You taught me I could when you signed everything yourself." The tables were turning, and Claire began to realize that what she thought was a perfect scam had serious flaws. As the court case unfolded, Maggie remained steadfast in prayer. She recited Psalm 37 every day, "Commit your way to the Lord, trust in Him, and He will bring this about." And every word came true before her eyes. Claire now had to explain to the judge how she obtained those signatures. And her lawyer looked uncomfortable. Witnesses began to emerge. The former nanny, the neighbor, the pastor. Everyone had something to say about Claire's behavior in recent months. The caring daughter narrative crumbled with each testimony. And Maggie, with tears in her eyes, thanked God for not staying silent. The document she signed was irrevocable, but the story could still have justice. It was a Sunday morning when everything finally came crashing down. Claire arrived home with an impatient expression, fiddling with her phone while chattering loudly about a brunch with investors. Maggie was sitting on the porch, watering her plants, as she had for over 40 years. Her daughter didn't even greet her. She just walked in, slamming the door loudly. The silence that followed said it all. Half an hour later, Claire reappeared with 2 suitcases in her hands. "There. Everything's already packed," she said coldly. Maggie looked at the suitcases, confused. "What do you mean, honey?" Claire didn't answer. She simply placed the suitcases at the front door and said, "You're leaving today. The nursing home car will be here in 20 minutes. They're already waiting." Maggie felt her stomach turn. "Is this some kind of joke?" she asked, trying to remain calm. Claire snorted. "No, Mom. This is necessary. I have a life to lead, and you're holding me back. There'll be food, a shower, a bed. Better than being alone here. And let's face it, this house doesn't even suit you anymore." The pain was so sharp that Maggie had to hold on to the railing. She never imagined she'd be thrown out by someone she'd carried, fed, and clothed. "You'll regret this, Claire," he said, his voice breaking. But his daughter just laughed. "Life is about decisions, Mom. And this is mine." Then he turned and walked back in, as if nothing had happened. The nursing home driver arrived minutes later. He was a kind man, but he didn't say many words. "Come on, Ms. Maggie. I have other seniors to pick up today." Maggie picked up her bags with trembling hands. She looked at the front door and saw that it was ajar. Claire had left the exit wide open. Literally, the door was open to the street. As she walked to her car, Maggie looked at the house as if it were the last time. Every step was a farewell. The white picket fence, the porch swing, the window where she sewed. Every detail seemed to say goodbye. But what Maggie didn't know was that someone was watching her from across the street. Miss Helen, the neighbor, saw it all and ran to get the phone. In the nursing home, everything was too clean, too cold. The hallways smelled of disinfectant and loneliness. Maggie was placed in a small room with an iron bed and an uncurtained window. The other women didn't say much. Some stared into space. Others wept softly. Maggie took a deep breath. It was rock bottom. But it was here that her ascent would begin. That first night, Maggie couldn't sleep. She sat in the armchair, staring at the moon. And she thought of Joseph. If you had been here, none of this would have happened. But then a memory invaded her mind. The will. The document. The lawyer Lucas. And a line from the 27th Psalm, "Though my father and my mother forsake me, the Lord will take me up." The next day, Henry showed up unexpectedly at the home. "I heard what happened. You're not staying here. We'll work this out, Maggie." He brought good news. Lucas had secured an emergency hearing. The judge would review the documents soon. It was the chance they needed. And Maggie, for the first time in days, smiled. Claire, for her part, posted on social media as if everything was perfect. "Starting a new cycle," she wrote, with a photo of herself drinking coffee in a stylish cafe. But behind the scenes, she had already received the legal notice. And she was furious. "Who does this old woman think she is?" she yelled into the phone to her lawyer. Fear was beginning to take shape. At home, Maggie found strength in the little things. A lady named Dolores began to join her during lunch. They exchanged stories, laughed at soap operas, and prayed together before bed. "God still has plans for you, Maggie," Dolores would say with conviction. And that sentence became a seed. Hope sprouted again. On the third day, Lucas arrived with a briefcase full of documents. "We're ready. The hearing will be tomorrow." Maggie could hardly believe it. "You'll need to be strong, Miss Maggie. But we have a solid case." She didn't expect this. And indeed, Claire was unprepared. She thought she had won. But time was the ally of the just. At the hearing, Maggie walked in with her head held high. She was wearing a simple blue dress, the same one she'd worn on her 50th wedding anniversary. Claire arrived late, wearing makeup, high heels, and a look of disdain. "Let's get this over with," she told her lawyer. But when she saw the documents on the judge's desk, her face paled. The judge read aloud, "It is stated here that any transfer of property would require notarized mutual consent." Claire tried to argue. She said her mother didn't remember, that she was confused. But Maggie stood firm. "I'm old, but I'm not stupid. And I would never have authorized this if I'd known what she would do to me." The silence in the courtroom was absolute. Claire tried to hide her despair, but her hands were shaking. Lucas presented the evidence: audio, photos, testimonies. Claire's lawyer asked for time, asked for clarification. But the judge saw no room for doubt. "This document nullifies any transfer made without due process." And then he banged the gavel. "Immediate return of possession of the property to Mrs. Margaret Dawson. Claire Dawson will be investigated for misuse of power of attorney." Maggie felt her legs give out. Henry grabbed her hand. Claire ran from the room screaming, accusing everyone of conspiracy. But now, control had slipped from her grasp. And the price for her choices would be exacted. In the following days, Maggie returned to her home. Every room felt different. Cold. Empty. But it was home. And she was back. With the church's help, she rearranged the furniture, cleaned every corner, and replanted the flowers. And on the front door, she hung a small sign with a biblical phrase, "As for me and my house, we will serve the Lord." Claire disappeared for a time. No one knew where she was. But Maggie didn't feel anger. She only felt sadness. She continued to pray for her every night. "Lord, open my daughter's eyes. Restore her heart. May she remember who she once was." It was the prayer of a mother wounded, but never defeated. One morning, a letter arrived. It was from Claire. Just 2 lines: "I messed up. But I still don't know how to fix it." Maggie read it and wept. Maybe there was repentance. Maybe there was still salvation. But that belonged to God's timing. For now, she returned to tending her garden, her faith, her life. And what would come next would be even more surprising. The return home was silent. Maggie could smell dust and memories mingling in the air. He sat in the old rocking chair on the porch and stared at the gate for hours. He wasn't expecting visitors, nor sweet words. He just needed peace. But what she didn't know was that a new alliance was about to emerge, the most unlikely of all. 3 days after the hearing, Henry showed up with an apple pie. "I made it myself. My wife's recipe, God rest her soul." Maggie smiled. "Sit down, Henry. The house is very quiet." He sat down. They sat in silence for a few minutes, just listening to the sounds of the neighborhood. Then he said, "Have you ever thought about opening the doors again?" Maggie laughed, not understanding. "Open doors for what? What you've been through is enough." Henry smiled back. "To help other women. Other ladies going through something similar. You know how it is. The shame, the silence, the fear. You overcame it all." And there, a seed was planted. A new purpose began to germinate. The following Sunday, during worship, the pastor mentioned Maggie in his sermon. Here we have an example of faith and resilience. A woman who not only survived, but overcame through truth and God's love. Maggie wept softly in the front pew, and when she looked back, she saw several other women in tears. This was no coincidence. After the service, one of them approached her. "I saw your story in court. Something similar happened to me. But I didn't have the courage to react." Maggie took the woman's hands. "You still can. And I'll help you." It was in that moment that she realized her pain had become a mission. And Henry would be her right-hand man on this journey. They created something simple yet powerful. A support group for women over 60 who were being exploited by family members. They called it Hope House. Weekly meetings in the converted garage. Tea, cakes, and sharing. It was the beginning of something transformative. And Maggie now had a sparkle in her eyes that hadn't been seen in a long time. Henry handled the structure, the contacts, the practicalities. Maggie was the heart, the attentive ear, the firm word, the open Bible. Each meeting began with a prayer and ended with a hug. And the stories that emerged were heartbreaking. Abandonment, blows, loneliness. But there was also forgiveness, new beginnings, and faith. One day, a lady named Ethel arrived crying. "My grandson took all my cards. I can't buy bread anymore." Maggie hugged her. "You have more than that, honey. You have us." Henry took Ethel to the bank the next day. He managed to recover some of what she had lost. And this became routine, helping, guiding, welcoming. Word of the group spread. The church supported it. The neighborhood began to pitch in. Donations poured in, food, chairs, even a new stove. The garage became a meeting room, an office, and a home for many who had nowhere else to turn. And most impressively, it all stemmed from Maggie's pain. From the door Claire closed, God opened a much bigger one. Henry and Maggie began working side by side every day. They shopped together, organized files, and answered phone calls. Sometimes they argued like old siblings. Other times, they laughed like teenagers. And without realizing it, a new feeling began to blossom. It wasn't infatuation. It was something more mature, more serene. It was companionship. One night, after a fundraiser, Henry said, "You make me want to get out of bed every day." Maggie was speechless. Her silence was enough for him to understand. He didn't force anything. He just held her hand and said, "I'm here, okay? Whenever you're ready." And that was more beautiful than any declaration. Claire learned about Casa de Esperanza from third parties. She saw photos on social media, comments, praise, articles in the local newspaper. On the outside, she said she didn't care. Inside, pride burned. "My mother's become a saint now," she sarcastically remarked to a friend. But deep down, something bothered her. The woman she tried to destroy was now a light to others. Months passed. Maggie now slept better. She ate better. She smiled more. Her hair was thicker, her skin more vibrant. It was as if each woman she helped gave her back a piece of herself. God was restoring not only her home, but her soul. And Henry, He was the angel in disguise, holding it all together with steady hands and a kind heart. One day, two women arrived with a teenage girl. She was kicked out of her home by her mother. She has nowhere to go. Maggie welcomed the girl with a hug. "You have a home here, my dear." And in that moment, the purpose of Casa de Esperanza expanded. It was no longer just for elderly women. It was for all women who carried invisible wounds. With the help of a volunteer lawyer and a church social worker, the house became an official organization. They secured land, community funding, and began construction on a small shelter. Maggie had never imagined experiencing this. But now, she was part of something bigger than herself. Much bigger. One rainy morning, Henry brought a gift. A frame with a biblical quote engraved in wood, "Weeping may endure for a night, but joy comes in the morning." Maggie wept as she read it. This was exactly what she was experiencing now. The night had been long. But morning had finally arrived. That afternoon began like any other. Maggie was organizing the House of Hope's files when she found a cardboard box Claire had left in the basement years ago. "Don't throw it away, Mom. It's just old paper," she'd said at the time. Maggie had never dared to touch it, but something about that afternoon compelled her. She opened the box and froze. There, among old bills and draft letters, lay a thick, yellowed envelope. No return address, no identification. Maggie opened it slowly. Inside, she found a bank letterhead, dated 10 years ago. It was an updated will, a supplementary annex signed by Joseph, acknowledging the possibility of legal challenge if any clause was violated. Claire had never destroyed that paper. Maggie's blood ran cold. This document was the final piece of the puzzle. What Claire thought was lost or forgotten still existed. And what's more, it contained the signature of a second lawyer as a witness. It was irrefutable. Maggie brought the paper to Lucas. The young lawyer read it with wide eyes. "She committed perjury. And this is irrefutable evidence." Claire never imagined this paper had survived. She searched the attic, burned copies, and covered all traces. But with that slip, her downfall was sealed. Lucas urged caution. "If we decide to use this, it will be final. There could be serious criminal implications." Maggie took a deep breath. "I don't want revenge. But I want justice. Not for myself, but for all the women who have been through this." Henry supported the decision. "God put this in your hands for a reason." And so, the proceedings began. Lucas prepared a formal petition to reopen the case. Claire was notified, but this time, she remained silent. She disappeared from social media, didn't respond to emails, and refused calls. He knew her time was running out. During one of the House meetings, Maggie anonymously shared the story of the forgotten document. The women looked at each other, some of them tearing up. It was a powerful symbol. The truth always finds a way to emerge. Even if someone tries to erase your story. "God keeps every page written with love," Maggie said, her voice breaking. The new hearing was scheduled. And this time, Claire appeared haggard, dressed modestly, without makeup. Her lawyer was different, more reserved, less arrogant. Maggie arrived with Henry and Lucas. The atmosphere was heavy, but Maggie's spirit was light. There was no longer anger. Only purpose and faith. The judge analyzed the new document. He read it aloud, carefully. Claire never looked up. Her silence spoke louder than any defense. "It is proven that there was concealment of evidence, attempted fraud, and misuse of power of attorney. Considering the new documents, the possibility of criminal action is reopened." Maggie closed her eyes. It wasn't a victory, it was a deliverance. The judge asked if she wanted to proceed with the criminal case. She thought for a few seconds. "Your Honor, I leave this in God's hands. I just want my peace. And I want her to know that, despite everything, I still pray for her every night." The words resonated throughout the courtroom. Claire cried. For the first time in a long time, she truly cried. She didn't say anything. She just left the room, staring at the floor. It was the first crack in the wall of pride. Maggie returned home with a peaceful heart. She knew that forgiveness was a gift, but that forgetting wasn't necessary to move forward. And now, she was free. In the days that followed, the story of the forgotten paper spread. It appeared on senior rights blogs, local newspapers, and even a Christian women's podcast told the story. Maggie began receiving letters from all over the country. Women who had been through something similar. Children begged their mothers for forgiveness. Pastors thanked her for her example of faith and steadfastness. Henry prepared a special bookshelf at Casa de Esperanza. There, they placed symbolic copies of documents that marked the project's history. In the center, framed, was the paper Claire forgot to tear. Below it, a small plaque, "Truth doesn't need to scream. It just resists." It was a permanent reminder that good, even in silence, always finds a way. Maggie never saw Claire in person again. But one day, when she opened her mailbox, she found a plain envelope with no return address. Inside was an old photograph of Claire as a child, sitting on Joseph's lap. On the back, just one sentence, "I'm sorry, Mom." Maggie cried, hugging the image. It wasn't enough. But it was a start. She took the photo to the house and showed it to the other women. We can't control our children's choices, but we can choose what to do with our pain. Those words echoed in the hearts of those present. And once again, Maggie transformed wound into healing, loss into mission, tears into hope. The cycle repeated itself and expanded. The forgotten paper wasn't just legal evidence. It was a symbol, a reminder that God doesn't allow lies to last long. That the truth, even when suppressed, even when ignored, even when seemingly destroyed, still lives. And that in due time, He brings to light all that was hidden. And if that paper survived, if even amidst the chaos it remained intact, then Maggie's faith could also endure. Because what saves us isn't always strength. Sometimes it's perseverance. Sometimes it's a yellowed sheet of paper. Sometimes you're a mother who never stopped praying. Claire began to live in silence. She left social media, avoided friends, and declined work invitations. The woman who once spoke loudly, who exuded confidence and control, now walked with her eyes lowered and her soul restless. Something was consuming her insides. It wasn't fear of human justice. It was something else. Deeper, invisible, and relentless. It was the kind of judgment that needed no court, no judge, no witness. It was the weight of one's own conscience. The kind of punishment that settles in the heart and whispers in the wee hours of the morning, "You know what you did." Claire would wake in the middle of the night in a cold sweat. She had nightmares. She relived the scene of her mother being thrown out with her bags in hand. And she cried. Silently. Maggie, for her part, continued her life peacefully. But never indifferently. She continued to pray for Claire every night. She never asked for revenge. She asked for repentance. She asked for healing. She knew that God works behind the scenes of the soul, even when all seems lost. And that His timing is not like ours. We must trust and wait. Claire started attending a small church downtown. She'd enter through the side door, sit in the back pews, and leave before the service ended. Almost no one recognized her. But she listened. Every word, every verse, and everything seemed to speak directly to her. It was as if God was saying, "I'm still here, even after everything." One morning, the pastor read a passage from Luke 15, the parable of the prodigal son. Claire felt a tightness in her chest so strong she thought about running away. But she stayed. She listened to the end. While he was still a long way off, his father saw him and was moved with compassion. He ran and threw his arms around him. That broke something inside her. And for the first time, she fell to her knees on the church floor. Tears flowed uncontrollably. Guilt, shame, longing, everything mingled. The daughter who had once been his pride was now dust. But amidst the pain, he felt something different. A slight, almost imperceptible relief. It was as if God was saying, "There is still a way." And it was on that cold, sacred ground that Claire took the first step back. Meanwhile, at the House of Hope, Maggie was receiving more and more women. And she listened to each story as if she had been there before. A woman named Ruth told of her granddaughter who locked her in her room. Another, named June, said her own son forced her to sign checks. Maggie was no longer shocked. But she still cried. She always said, "God sees everything. And He acts when we least expect it." And the other women agreed, not with words, but with tears. The House of Hope was now more than a shelter. It was an altar. A place where God's judgment wasn't punishment, but justice clothed in love. A place where broken hearts were mended. Claire spent weeks fighting her pride. She thought about writing, calling, showing up at her mother's door. But she was stuck. The fear of rejection was greater than the desire to make things right. Until one day, she decided to write a letter. "Mom, I understand if you don't want to see me. But I just want you to know that I regret it. Everything. And that I love you, even after everything." Maggie received the letter at dusk. She sat on the porch and read it slowly. She cried. But she didn't respond. Not yet. She wanted her daughter to understand that forgiveness isn't forgetting. It's rebuilding. And rebuilding takes time, truth, and pain. So Maggie prayed. And she put the letter in her Bible, at Psalm 51. "Create in me a clean heart, O God." The pastor of the church Claire attended approached her. "Your mother is known as a woman of faith. And you, too, are a daughter of God. There's still time." Claire listened in silence. She asked if she could serve in some way. The pastor suggested a ministry to the elderly. She accepted. And there, ironically, she began caring for women similar to her mother. Each woman I helped was a wound that hurt anew. But it was also a chance for healing. She heard stories so similar to Maggie's that she wondered how she could have repeated so many mistakes. But God was shaping Claire. Not with shouting, not with punishment. With silence. With subtle confrontations. With love that corrects without humiliating. Henry heard about the letter. He asked Maggie if she wanted to respond. She said, "Not yet. But I'm praying her heart will continue to open." Henry understood. He knew Maggie didn't want justice with her feet. She wanted restoration with her hands. She wanted God's judgment to fulfill its purpose, not just punishment. And she did. Because Claire, little by little, stopped hiding. She began speaking in church groups. She told her story at a women's service. She admitted her mistakes. She said she destroyed what she loved most because of her ego. And that now she just wanted a second chance. People wept. But heaven smiled. One afternoon, Claire showed up at the House of Hope. She arrived with flowers. She entered slowly. The ladies recognized her. Some moved away. Others just watched. Maggie was in the back of the room, sorting through papers. When she saw her, she froze. Claire walked over to her, knelt, and said, "I didn't come to ask for anything. I just wanted to look you in the eyes and say, 'Forgive me.'" The silence was absolute. Maggie took a deep breath. Her eyes filled with tears. And then, her voice breaking, she said, "Get up, daughter. What you did destroyed me. But God rebuilt me. And it is through Him that I forgive you." Claire wept like a child in her mother's arms. And in that embrace, God's judgment was concluded, not with condemnation, but with redemption. The reunion wasn't the end of the story. It was a new beginning. Maggie still had scars. Claire still had much to repair. But now there was a bridge. A path. And that path was made of truth, repentance, faith, and love. A love that had endured everything. And now, faced with God's silent judgment, chose to begin again. The reconciliation between mother and daughter didn't erase the past, but it brought a new kind of hope. Maggie and Claire began to see each other slowly, cautiously, and respectfully. They didn't talk much about what happened. It still hurt. But they talked about what they could build from there. It was like rebuilding a house with bricks of regret and the cement of faith. Claire began volunteering at Casa de Esperanza. At first, the women looked at her with suspicion. Some refused to talk to her. But Maggie never interfered. She knew that justice isn't just what happens in the courtroom. It's what happens in people's hearts. And time was the true judge. Henry, ever attentive, would say, "Let time work, Maggie. It's the best sculptor there is." And it was. Because each day, Claire took a step forward. She washed dishes, arranged chairs, listened to stories, carried bags. She served. And it was in serving that she began to understand everything she had previously broken out of vanity. The community also responded. A local newspaper ran a story about the project. It told, without much detail, the story of a mother and daughter who overcame a family betrayal. The headline read, "When Love is Greater Than Pain." The response was enormous. Churches in other states called, asking for guidance. Maggie became a national figure. But Claire still didn't feel free. Something inside her weighed heavily. One day, she went to Lucas, the lawyer. "I want everything back legally. The house, the assets. I want everything in my mother's name. I don't want any of this anymore." Lucas was surprised. "Are you sure?" And Claire replied, "Yes. I don't want just spiritual justice. I want complete justice." The process was quick. With the document Claire voluntarily signed, everything was transferred back to Maggie. When the paperwork was ready, Lucas handed it to her with a smile. "Now it's officially yours." Again, Maggie cried. Not because she had recovered her belongings, but because she saw her daughter, for the first time, truly transformed. During a meeting with the ladies of the house, Claire asked to speak. She stood before them all, her voice trembling. "I destroyed my family. I screwed my mother. I wanted to take what wasn't mine. But God reached out to me. And I'm here to say, if He forgave me, He can forgive anyone." The room fell silent. Then, timid applause. And a group hug. It was on that day that Claire truly felt she had begun to be forgiven. She was no longer just the erring daughter. She was now a repentant woman. Healed. And, for the first time, useful to the kingdom of God. Justice was being served. Not by force, but by truth. By humility. By the Holy Spirit. The House of Hope grew. A second warehouse was rented. A website was created. Donations poured in from various places. Maggie was invited to tell her story at a Christian conference in Nashville. On stage, before hundreds of women, she simply said, "God's justice never fails. But it comes at the right time. Never before. Never after." Claire followed her backstage, her eyes brimming with tears. Each word her mother spoke seemed to heal another wound. It was the kind of justice that can't be explained. It can only be felt. Heaven's justice, which seeks not punishment, but transformation. And that transformation was now visible, even in the eyes of those who had once been the problem. The judge from the previous case heard about the turnaround. He invited Maggie to speak at the courthouse. There, she spoke to young lawyers. No amount of paper can fix what the heart destroys. But there is grace. And grace mends even what seemed irreparable. Claire watched from the back. She applauded heartily. Silently. One autumn morning, Claire asked something unusual. "Mom, can I live here again? Just for a while." Maggie hesitated. But she answered wisely, "You don't have to go back to where you destroyed. You need to build something new. If you want, we can remodel the back room. Start from scratch, your way. But with firm roots." Claire accepted. She helped paint, repaired furniture, and planted flowers in the garden. It was another symbol of justice. Her daughter now cared for the house she had tried to take. With love. With zeal. With regret. And Maggie, from her rocking chair, watched silently. She knew this was the right time. God's time. The women of the house learned from all of this. Not just about law, but about faith. About boundaries. About forgiveness. Some, inspired, also reached out to their children. Others wrote letters. One even spoke to her grandson again after 10 years. It was as if the justice served in Maggie's life was multiplying in other stories. Henry remained by Maggie's side. Closer, more serene. Sometimes she would look at him and think, "God is so good that He gave me back more than I lost." And he, as always, would say, "Your life is proof that justice doesn't have to be revenge. It can be healing." And that was exactly what was happening there, in front of everyone. That moment also served as an answer to many who said, "But what if she doesn't change?" Maggie always replied, "It's not about her changing. It's about me not stopping loving. Justice is God's. I just need to continue being who He called me to be." And this attitude became strength for other mothers, other wives, other grandmothers. At a special service, the pastor said something that resonated with everyone: "Time heals, but only God restores." Claire and Maggie stood there, holding hands. They looked ahead. The past still hurt, yes, but it no longer bled. It was just a reminder of how God can transform ashes into testimony, pain into mission, injustice into salvation. It was an ordinary late afternoon, the sky painted in shades of orange and pink. Claire stood alone on the porch, watching the sunset. Life had taken a new direction, but something still weighed heavily on her chest. There was a plea for forgiveness she'd never had the courage to make. Not to her mother. To her father. The only one she could never hear: "I'm sorry, Dad. I destroyed what you left." Maggie understood her daughter's struggle. "I knew that some wounds heal not with words, but with time and truth." And then, on a quiet afternoon, he placed something in Claire's hands, an old cassette tape. "Your father recorded this a month before he died. I never had the courage to listen to it." Claire took it to the back room and pressed play. Joseph's voice filled the air. "If you ever lose yourself, my daughter, know that a father's love never dies. Even if you forget me, I will never stop loving you." Claire broke down. She fell to her knees. She cried like never before. A pain that pierced her soul, something that could no longer be fixed with actions. That chance had already passed. It was too late to make amends with her father. That night, Claire didn't eat dinner. She didn't go out. She remained silent. Maggie respected the mourning. Sometimes you have to lose something forever to understand what you had. The next day, Claire went to the cemetery. She brought flowers. She sat before the headstone. And for the first time, she prayed aloud. "Father, I wasn't the daughter you deserved. But today, I'm a different person. And if I can honor your memory, I'll spend the rest of my life doing so." Henry watched from afar. He talked to Maggie. "She's changing, but her regrets are deep. There are things she'll carry with her for the rest of her life." Maggie nodded. "Yes. But even so, God can still use every pain to heal others." And that was exactly what was beginning to happen. At the next service, Claire gave a testimony about her father. Her voice was choked but firm. "My father loved me until the end, even though he didn't know I would betray him. And his love, even from afar, brought me home." Many women cried. Others hugged her afterward. And they all saw that something had been restored. But not everyone was ready to forgive her. A woman named Bernice, from the House of Hope, confronted her. "You may have changed, but nothing can erase what you did to your mother." Claire just lowered her head. "I know. And I don't expect you to accept me. I just hope the pain I caused doesn't happen to anyone else." Bernice, for the first time, didn't answer. On Joseph's birthday, Maggie made a special lunch. Just her and Claire. She put an extra plate on the table. "For him," she said, smiling. Claire couldn't hold back the tears. "Mom, why can you still smile at me?" Maggie replied simply, "Because I'm not driven by grief. I'm driven by God." It was the kind of answer that silences any guilt. The House of Hope project gained a new wing named after Joseph. There, women received financial, legal, and spiritual guidance. Claire took over this leadership. And each time she taught, she felt she was honoring her father. But deep down, she knew, she would never hear an "I forgive you" from him. She would never have one last embrace. That was her cross. During a visit to her old school, Claire saw a mural with old photos. There she was, at 12, holding a model student certificate. She stared at it for long minutes. She thought about how lost she had gotten along the way, and how long it had taken to get back. She cried right there, silently, and an elderly teacher approached her. "It's never too late to do the right thing, dear. But sometimes, it's too late for the ones we love." Those words lingered in Claire's mind for days. They echoed like a constant reminder. And so she began writing a book. Not about her life, but about her mother. About forgiveness, justice, faith. She called it, The Hands That Lifted Me. When she finished the manuscript, she inscribed it, To Joseph Dawson, my father, who loved me, even when I didn't know how to love. She showed it to Maggie, fearful. Her mother read it silently, from beginning to end. When she finished, she looked into her daughter's eyes and said, This book will heal many people. And I'm sure your father would be proud. Claire smiled, but her eyes were still teary. She knew that what she lost would never return, but what remained could still blossom. The book launch was simple, held in a church auditorium. Maggie gave the opening prayer. Henry organized the invitations. Claire read a passage aloud. And at the end, a woman approached. My daughter kicked me out of the house 3 years ago. I never understood why. But now, I want to find her. That sentence was all. The mission was accomplished. On the way home, Claire said something unexpected. If I could go back in time, I would give anything not to have done what I did. Maggie held her daughter's hand and said, If you hadn't done it, maybe the house wouldn't exist. Or the cures. Or the book. God uses even our flaws, Claire. But that doesn't mean it doesn't hurt. And it hurt. In the quiet moments, in the cold early mornings, on special occasions. Forgiveness didn't erase the fact, but it redirected the future. And even though Joseph could never return, his love continued to shape his daughter. Claire learned this the hard way. With tears, with regret, with faith, and with time. Because sometimes, life offers more than one chance. But not always with the same people. And Claire had to accept that. Learn from it. Grow from it. She cried, yes. She cried like never before. But it was too late to change the past. And at the same time, it was still early enough to change tomorrow. Now that you've heard this story, stop for a moment and take a deep breath. How many times in your life have you felt betrayed, forgotten, or wronged by someone who was supposed to love and protect you? How many times have you thought forgiveness would be impossible, or that justice would never come? Maggie and Claire's story is more than a family drama. It's a vivid portrait of what many women, especially mothers and grandmothers, face in silence. But God doesn't forget. He sees every tear, hears every prayer whispered on the pillow, and acts, even when the world seems to turn its back. Sometimes the answer doesn't come as we expect. Sometimes justice seems delayed. But it comes, in the right time, in the right way, with eternal purpose. Do you believe this? And now, I want to invite you to reflect. Have you ever forgiven someone who hurt you deeply? Or are you waiting for an apology that may never come? What would you do if you were in Maggie's shoes? Or Claire's? Write in the comments. Tell me your story. Your pain doesn't have to go alone anymore. Maybe your experience is just the answer another woman is searching for right now. And if this story touched your heart, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. Turn on notifications to continue receiving stories that nourish the soul and strengthen faith. This helps me bring messages of hope and transformation to more people. Before closing, I want to leave a prayer. Lord, now visit every heart that has heard this story. Restore families, bring healing where there was pain, justice where there was injustice, and peace where there was silence. May no one watching feel alone. May your presence fill every space. Amen. And remember, you're still alive. That means God is still writing your story.